YouTube channel of the SIG.
Oh, I see.
Because those webinars are open to everybody. If you don't feel comfortable recording, that's totally fine. It's okay, Mullen. You can say no. Like, we can still have this as a kind of a small conversation if you're not comfortable recording this.
It's okay.
Are you sure?
Yeah, yes.
Okay. Adela, you're okay with recording?
Yeah, I'm fine. No
Okay,
problem.
perfect. Anna?
Yeah, why not?
Okay, wonderful. All right, so welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Hiba Ibrahim, and I'm actually facilitating this webinar as the president of the Collaborations Graduate Students SIG. I welcome you all to this webinar. This is actually our first webinar of the year, and I'm so excited that we are doing this with both of my wonderful colleagues, Molin and Adele. And please, if you have any questions to any of them, you can basically put in the chat or simply unmute. I hope that the group gets bigger because we have, I think, 10 people who registered. And if you have also, for those watching, if you have any questions, I think Molin and Adele would welcome your questions afterwards. So thank you both, Mullen and Adele, for joining. Would you like just to, kind of introduce yourselves before we get started? And how about Adele? You go first.
Um, Hi everyone. Adele Merlino. I received my PhD August of 2023. I had started the process in 2017, mid 2017. So it took me a good 6 years to complete.
Mhm.
And presently I am teaching communications as well as freshman experience in two universities, and I am an instructional
Mhm.
technologist of online learning in another. And I welcome talking about the process of writing. It's
Yeah, thanks, Adele. Thank you. Mullen?
Yes. Hi, everybody. Thank you for the invitation, Hiba, to join this webinar. I'm a teacher educator in the subject of English, and I'm in Malmö, very southern part of Sweden, close to Denmark. Um, I've worked as a teacher educator for a very long time, and I decided some years ago that I was going for the PhD because an opportunity opened up to do so. And I
Mhm.
graduated from the PhD in 2024, April, so very recently, actually.
Mhm.
And after that, I've gone back to my regular job here at the university in Malmö.
Mhm. Yeah. Wonderful. And I think I'm excited to have both of you also because you both come from different academic systems, right? Mullen, you're in Sweden, and Adele, you're based in the US. So I hope that whatever tips and advice and things you would share today with everybody would, that people would relate to, one of these educational systems. So, because we are focusing on the dissertation writing process in particular, not the PhD, like experience, I would like maybe to focus mostly on that in this webinar and maybe get us started by discussing. So, obviously, when we talk about writing dissertation or dissertation writing, we're not just talking about the actual writing. It actually starts with data collection, data analysis, and then when you basically do your outlining, dissertation, et cetera, et cetera. That's maybe how I understand it, or a lot of people understand it. But for you, when you basically started thinking about your dissertation writing, where were you in the stage of your PhD, and why did you start thinking about, writing as you did in that time, if that makes sense?
Should I? Can
Do you
I?
want to
Yeah,
start?
please.
Okay.
Yeah, Adele, please.
The writing started fairly early in the dissertation phase, actually, way before data collection.
Mm,
There was writing throughout the whole process because you had to figure out what problem you were going to study, what situation you were going to look into. And from there, you were going to do a lit review. And that took a lot of reading and writing and you know,
mm,
getting all that together, that was a big nut to crack, the lit review, especially in when we're speaking of coil. There are many gaps in the literature, and that's
Mm,
you had to like pinpoint what gap were you going to study, you know, how you were going to collect that data, how you were going to um, show whatever question you were trying to answer. So
mm,
starts early. You know, the first three chapters was a lot of writing, and then um, the fourth was figuring out the methodology, and the fifth was the methodology. What
mm,
happened, your data collection, your results, and your
mm,
recommendations in the in future studies. So the writing was just when you think it was okay and you had it, you know, there were edits and switch here, this to that, and you know,
mm,
what does this mean, and what are you trying to say? So you
mhm,
start out writing this big thing, these first three chapters, and then you revisit it again, and you're constantly involving it, constant,
mhm,
even in the data collection, even after that, when you studied all the data and you figured out what it all means,
mm,
um, you're still editing things. You're still going back to the whole
mhm,
from square one. So
mhm,
uh, that I could see people wanting to throw in the towel at that point because it's like, oh my God, I can't do this. You know,
mm.
you have to like hang in there and keep
Mhm.
going.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And Mullen, I think you come from a different system where you had to do multiple studies, right? Your dissertation was a little bit different. So can you tell us a little bit about that and when the actual or the dissertation writing process started for you?
Yes. Yeah, it's a very different kind of dissertation. Here we can choose. We could either go for the one holistic book, or we can choose a compilation thesis. And a
Mm,
compilation thesis includes at least four published articles in peer-reviewed journals, and then what we call, in straight translation to English, it would be a jacket, actually, what you sort of put around
mm,
articles, and that would be usually it's around 100 to 150 pages of your methodology chapter, your theory chapter, and so forth.
mm,
So in my case, the writing process started right away, I would say, with Article 1, drafting Article 1, because the
yeah.
jacket, we do it last, usually.
Mm,
You start to work on it while you write articles, but you really do it in the end of the whole PhD,
mm,
usually when you have your articles already published so that you know what kind of studies you actually ended up doing in the end.
mm,
So for me, it was a very organic process from the beginning to the end.
mm,
I had a plan roughly for my articles, but it turned out to be very differently actually
mm,
along the way. And I was going to say, I took some notes while you were speaking, Adele. For me, we've had a lot of discussions here regarding these two models of the PhD. Which one do we prefer and why? And there are pros and cons to each one, of course.
mm,
For
mm,
me and my personality, the compilation, I think, is the preferred model actually, because what happens there is you write an article and you can't go back. It's done. It's locked, you know.
mm. Yep.
No matter what you think about it, it's out there, it's published, it's done. Uh, Otherwise, I think for me, it would have been very easy to get stuck in revising and going back.
Mm,
And I spoke to many of my colleagues here who chose the other model, more like yours, Adele, and they said, yeah, you really have to be disciplined because you can always go back and
mm,
tear it up and start fresh, you know.
Yeah.
You conduct a lit review in yours, Malin?
Yes, you do. But you have, well, you've got a lit review in each and every article, of course. And then you also have a background section in your overarching text. So that will be one chapter, which is the background section. And there
Hmm.
you will have a lit review as well.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, you both obviously you described two different types of dissertations, it seems, but I think you both mentioned something important, and that is you start with something, and then you usually, if not always, end up with a very different product. Or you start with a plan, and then you kind of keep going back and forth, back and forth. This could be a daunting process and very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
What are some tips, I think, or what are some things you would tell students who are in the stage of writing, and how do you prepare yourself to embrace, this level of, like unexpected changes or, kind of going back and forth. What do you think helped you, or maybe now when you reflect back, obviously, um, what would you say or tell people about, getting ready to embrace this whole daunting process of going back and forth? Molin, what do you think?
I don't know if it helps, but I'm just going to say what comes to mind right now, because in the process of my researching and writing and digging into virtual exchange and also doing action research, so as most of us do, we actually also design and set up what we're
Mm,
researching along the way. So that is very daunting in itself because you're dealing with so many dimensions at the same time and human
mm,
beings where things will change, of course, and lead you in new direction.
mhm,
Suddenly, I was working with my colleague in Argentina, and we are both really sort of enthusiastic about theory, and we get lost in theory sometimes together. We found this one theoretical concept called expansive learning, and it just really captured the
mm,
that we, I think, have oftentimes in virtual exchange because it's about learning what's not yet there. So
mm,
it's from the beginning being very aware and open-minded about the fact that this will lead in new directions. I have a plan, but it will change. So
mm,
trying from the beginning not to be too frustrated about that and instead
mm,
welcoming the new opportunities.
mm. Yeah. Adele, what do you think?
Um, I definitely think you need to be patient,
Mm,
and that's often hard. But I found that, you know, there are times where you're going to be fast and furious with the writing, and then there are times where you just don't feel like it. You just don't feel like writing. And the way I approached it was there's this uh, method of studying called the Pomodoro method. I don't know if you've
Mm,
ever heard of it. Where,
mm-hmm. Can you explain it, yeah, to people who maybe don't know what it
yeah.
is?
So I'll turn everything off, my cell phone, whatever, I'll time it for like, let's say 20 minutes. I don't feel like doing more than that. So I'll do 20 minutes, 20 minutes of just going through stuff, stopping for another 20 minutes, maybe more, depending on how I'm feeling. I try not to fight that.
mm,
Mm,
And, you know, read a book, watch TV, go do laundry, come back
mm,
and spend another 20 minutes or a half hour. And I found like when I started to do that, like I broke away and came back, I was like ready to rumble a little bit more. And I would,
mhm,
pick up on that writing. Um, there's no real, answer to that. It's how you handle things. And, I didn't want to give up on this. I spent a lot of time on it and I wanted to see it through. And everybody tells me, oh, you only took 6 years. And I'm like, that's a long time. I think it's a long time.
Yeah, it is.
But I've been told by professors in my institution that it didn't take that long. Even
Hmm.
study, even doing the whole um, compilation of data and analyzing it didn't take too long. But
Mm.
once you get to that point, I think it moves faster. And you and your chair have a nice flow. Um, so I think that, there's a period where you may need to pace yourself more because it does get overwhelming and too much. And like I said, you need to like break away from it a little bit and then come back. I
I
don't recommend, I recommend writing every day, even if it's 10 minutes. You can't stop writing, you
You
know?
can't stop writing. I think that's a great way to put it. It's kind of a continuous process.
Right. You can't
Yeah.
every day, a little bit or a lot, whatever you feel like doing, but it's got to be done.
Mm. I can so relate to everything you're saying, of course, and
Mhm.
I agree. Um, I really struggled with writer's block when I was in my periods of writing because if I don't find strategies, I will sit and stare at the screen forever for such a long time. So I have to do exactly what you said. I have to find strategies to break away from it rather than staring, break away, do something else that will make you feel good or that will inspire you. Usually, when I'm walking, that's when the ideas come to me. Uh,
Mm.
and also, one of my supervisors, we have a board of supervisors here. So I actually had, it was quite unusual, but I had four supervisors and I got different sort of input from them. But one of my supervisors said something really good. And I always tell my students that I'm supervising now who are writing their smaller but also daunting degree projects in teacher education, the same advice. And he said, first of all, set up the structure so that you don't have an empty screen. So for an article, have the whole structure there with the titles and everything so you can see from beginning to the end, you can see that there's something there.
Mm.
And then dive in where you feel inspired. This is a professor in children's literature, and he's very sort of creative. And he said,
Mhm.
don't get stuck and stare at one section. If you feel more
Mm.
motivated to go in towards the end, start there. Or if you feel really motivated to write about a quote from one of your students and your data, start from that. And then you can build the paper. You don't have to have a chronological order, of course. So that really helped me to and also as Adele said, have a system where I was writing every day. For me, it worked to write in the morning, to
Mm.
make my coffee, sit down and with a fresh mind, write and do exactly what my supervisor said when
Mm.
I got stuck. Then switch to something where I feel a bit inspired. So at least, I'm working on something. Doesn't matter what it is.
Mm.
I was the exact opposite, Malin. I
Oh, okay.
I did not
Mhm.
write in the morning. I wanted to sleep. I
Mm,
worked all day,
yeah.
and I was writing till like 2:30 in the morning. And
Interesting.
for some reason, the juices were flowing during that time. It
Mhm.
worked. So,
I think
What would you
whatever
call it? Sorry, go ahead.
I think whatever time is suitable for you as a person,
mhm,
because I think also
absolutely.
that really depends on where you are in your life. I
Mhm.
used to be a night person when I was younger, and writing would be a night activity, and now it's completely different.
Mm.
But whatever works,
Yeah.
I'd say.
So for both of you, I mean, obviously, and I think this is, it's a personal interest as well, right? Like when is a good time for writing, but
Mm.
what was a good productive day of writing for both of you? Because again, this could be also different for different people. So for instance, Smolin, what was like how would you describe a good, like a not good, productive day of writing? for your dissertation, obviously?
Well, I mean, the spontaneous answer would be when I had a lengthy piece of writing. I had been able to write a lot, but I don't think that's the true answer. I think it's also a good day of writing could be when you've cracked something that, you'd seen as an obstacle previously, and suddenly, aha, you broke through it somehow. So it doesn't have to be about writing a lot.
Mm,
It can be about actually tackling something rather difficult and finding a
mm,
way forward, I think.
hmm. And Adele, what was a productive
It
day of
always
writing?
it always happened like Saturday evenings and Sunday evenings. I don't know why. Maybe because I didn't have that rush of the week and I was able to be more calm and go through my stuff and then really sit down and write. Um,
Mhm.
I also had this quirky thing where um, I would have all my stuff out on my desk. I wouldn't touch it. It would stay as is, so that way when I could come back, I knew where I was and I'd
Mm,
get back to it. Um, Organizing your literature, and books and all that, and what page was that on? It gets daunting. So I had, all these lists and all these tabs and all these memos on the side on the wall, reminding me of stuff.
Mhm.
So whatever works for you,
mm,
some people do that, other people create charts. It's
mm.
crazy how different people do different things.
Mhm.
But I
Yeah.
think it's important to sort of what you're describing here as well. And I've heard so many different models and versions of how you can approach that, but to create something that is a bit sort of visible for yourself,
Mm,
map for how am I moving forward, some sort of visual map.
Yes,
mm,
I would do that too, like my own handwritten
Mm,
thing on the wall,
mm,
pinned to the wall.
mm.
Uh, and that's how I reminded myself of things. Um, it's interesting that you start out so basic in your writing, and then you
mm,
really, with all that lit review, um, you start to like make connections. Well, this author said the same thing as that author, and you're able to do a multi, author citation. I always
mm,
used to wonder about that in the beginning, like how do these people keep tabs of that? And it took a while.
mm,
I was telling one of my colleagues just the other day, she picked up on her dissertation and she goes, how do you know when to do that? I said, you'll start to
mm,
recognize different authors saying the same thing, and you can paraphrase it and say they all said this. One, two, three, four, five said this. And,
mhm.
so it's interesting how that occurs.
Mm.
Yeah. I want to stop here for a moment and see if Anna or Nancy, if you guys have any questions about what we're discussing so far, please feel free to unmute and ask.
Yeah, just a few questions, really. The first one would be to Molin about those few articles which together consisted of your PhD thesis or dissertation. How planned was that process of writing those individual articles? Have you known that you would, because I understand that each article was about a different virtual exchange project, right? So was it planned right from the start? This article is going to be about this, another one is going to be about something else? Or it was like step-by-step approach, really?
It was very organic and it was a step-by-step approach because along the way, so many things happened that I couldn't control. The first major obstacle was the pandemic.
Mhm.
So I had something completely different in mind for my first article, but it couldn't happen because of the pandemic. So I had to rethink. And actually, my very first virtual exchange iteration that I had with a colleague in Poland and one in Argentina, we had a plan of sending all of our students into the city to explore different things. But then in week one of the virtual exchange project, the pandemic hit and nobody could go into the city. So the whole, it was a very close call for the entire virtual exchange project to crash. We thought in that week that we would have to sort of cancel the whole thing. So no, it unfolded step by step, and one thing led to the next. So I was just sort of, at times, I was floating along on this journey and sort of grabbing new opportunities and gaining new ideas for what I was going to do for the second iteration and the third one and so forth.
Mm-hmm. And another question about lit review. I mean, I'm struggling because I'm constantly feeling underprepared, and I feel like I need to read more to even start writing because, I still feel
Anna, just start writing. Start writing.
Yeah.
So writing first, lit review in the meantime, right?
Yeah,
That's
just do it.
the
Just
suggested
do it.
approach.
It'll be junk. That's okay. It'll be junk. But then you'll have something like Malin said, you have something down and then you could like work it. Trust me, just start. And then you'll start to see those connections too. So by writing, you'll get there. If you're just reading, I don't know, one ear out the other type of thing.
Right.
I think, Anna, your question actually makes me think of a very important question I also had in mind for you both, and that is working with difficult emotions in this process, especially fear. You can really get stuck, and I also speak of out of experience. I mean, sometimes you really do trust your data. You trust you have a good project, but there's always this fear that, maybe this is not good enough, or, my thinking of this data and my analysis is not good enough. And this, eventually then leads to procrastination and this idea of like, maybe later, maybe I need more time, maybe if I take a break, and then the break becomes a very long break. And then how did you work with difficult emotions, procrastination, fear during the process?
I had a hands-on strategy actually because I was going into the PhD process with two colleagues. They were in completely different subject areas or topics for their PhDs. But we decided early on, it was actually during the pandemic, to meet. We had a Zoom coffee every week, and we shared, all of us were sort of a bit older doing the PhDs in our 50s, actually. So we're all three of us, we're very used to having a career. It felt very strange to suddenly have feelings of doubt about what you're doing. We have not had that for a long time. But suddenly the PhD does that to you. And I think it's something that most PhD students can relate to, that it does something to your self-confidence.
Definitely.
Yes. So we would set up Zoom meetings, Zoom coffee, and then we would vent, and we would make it the meeting about one of us each time. So one person was sort of the subject of the discussion, and the other two people were pepping and supporting that person. So if you can find good people who can, well, support you in substantial, good, honest ways, not in superficial ways, that won't help. But if you have someone around you who can really say, okay, stop it now. This is not you. I don't recognize you. This is good enough.
Absolutely. My institution had they did this later on in my dissertation phase. They started this writing group. So I joined in once in a while, but I had friends. I had friends in the program. They were doing different topics, but still they were my sounding board for writing, for my doubts, for what I was going through. what was I going through with IRB, all that stuff.
Mm,
And I also, we have a common friend, Eva and I, Janita.
mm,
She was great. She was telling me, keep going, Adele. Don't stop, don't stop, don't stop. So don't let this get to you. You'll do it. You'll do it.
mm,
So, you need to hear that because
mm,
everybody goes through that doubt. You will go through that doubt. And, um, the whole, compiling of data. I did a mixed method and then I triangulated it. For me, the quantitative data was easy peasy. It's math. The numbers don't lie. But then the qualitative part, that was a little challenging for me because you really had to read into what everybody was saying. And that took longer than the quantitative. So, you know, it was a great learning process. Like I learned a lot.
mhm,
But you hit those bumps in the road. You just have to get over it.
Yeah.
And I have to say, my chair, I had three readers. One was an expert in the field, Stephanie Dosha. Um, and then my chair, he was awesome. And then my methodology chair, she was awesome too. Like I had three great people
mm,
um, that I could go to. So I was
mm.
lucky that way.
That's I think a very important point I would like to follow up on. But before I do this, I want to go back to Anna and Nancy if you have any follow-up questions um, on this topic or anything else that we've mentioned.
Could I just ask, Anna, are you exploring virtual exchange as well?
I was
Yeah,
just going to ask the same. Where are you?
yeah. Virtual exchange. I'm at the very beginning of my journey, facing some challenges with my supervisor, etc. So early days, truly, but I'm pretty determined to see through it.
Good.
Struggling with how to organize my workflow, basically. That's
Mm,
the trickiest thing of all, I would say. Another question I might have would be, how do you do it, like in the practical terms? There are different types of software for organizing a literature, or do you do it manually, printouts and everything? How do you approach the very basic level of starting the process?
I used an online site that compiled all my lit review and I put them in categories. And when I started the categories, I just did it blindly, and then I had to rethink the categories. But the citations were there, and I can easily, you know, back it up, download it, and back it up just in case. But I never had a problem. You
Which
can,
one did you use, Adele? Which
um,
website or which software?
I'll tell you right now. Hold on, let me look it up because I haven't used it in a while. And um,
There is one which is called Mendeley or
my
something.
bib, my bib, it's called.
Okay.
Yeah,
You put it in chat, right?
it's really good. I mean, it was so helpful.
Hmm.
You choose APA, whatever you're using, and you just put in the information, and right away it compiled citation and the whole reference. It was great. It was really great.
Mm.
Mhm. Can
But
you put the name of the software in chat?
yes, I'll do it
Please.
right now. I'll do it right now.
Thank you.
Also, I wanna touch upon something you said about your supervisor, that you're going through some challenges. The first super chair that I was offered, she just wasn't getting virtual exchange
Okay.
at all. At all. She didn't understand what it was about. And I, she was a language culture person,
Mm.
but totally, I was at my wit's end, and I was with her like 6 or 8 months.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to the dean of the department and said, help, it's not working for me. She's not getting me. She's not. So she said, well, who in the program do you think is appropriate? And I said, well, so and so. She goes, I was
Mm,
thinking of that. Or I said, you. And she says, I was thinking of that too.
mm,
So she asked my chair and he agreed. And then in the process, she says, any particular experts out there that you're willing to add on? Because you should have 3 people. And it seems to me this, virtual exchange in the US is such a innovative thing.
mm,
My qualitative professor said, this is amazing. You really need to explore this. This is like undone. It hasn't been done. You need to like do a dissertation on this. And I changed my topic after that to coil. And like I said, they gave me someone that just wasn't getting me, wasn't getting what I was saying. And in the end, after I got my group together, um, they all said how the the dissertation committee, after presenting my proposal and all that, were so impressed. They didn't even ask for any changes. They thought it was like amazing.
mm,
And then when I defended again, it was like an innovative dissertation like that. I
mhm,
was given compliments left and right. But in the beginning, I was banging my head against the wall with this dissertation chair that I had. So if you're not happy with this person, think about it long and hard. Maybe you may need
Mm-hmm.
to change.
Yeah, right.
mm.
Are you also a virtual exchange COIL practitioner, or you did
Yes.
just the research? Both, then.
Both,
Okay.
both. I coil in one of my courses, and on my campus, I'm a coil coordinator. So presently, I have 2 professors with 2 classes coiling with the Philippines, and I'm guiding them.
Mm-hmm.
The first coil that they did was really good. They barely had any hiccups, and now the Philippines wants to continue it, and they're investigating, ocean environment and the UN sustainability goals and all that. It's really a good project.
Mhm,
So
Mm-hmm.
I do both. I do it in my course and I help others.
mhm. Marlon, before I get back to you to ask you if you had a similar experience, I just want also to share personal experience with this, I guess, because I'm also researching virtual exchange. And as Adele said, at least in some North American contexts, it's such a new pedagogy to research. It's still kind of growing. And because it's new and it's not that common, at least in Canada, I really had to educate one of my committee members about it because we started, as you said, like, she's not getting it 100%. She started even like saying, oh, why are you doing this model, not that model? And I would just go back to say, but what you're suggesting is not VE, you know? So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you are in a situation where you find yourself educating such committee members about virtual exchange and what it is. And also, and that was one thing that my supervisor, kept telling me, especially at the proposal phase, which was, provide, like, for instance, she didn't get the model I was using. So he suggested that I bring in from literature things to kind of more clarify why this model will work, or like why this model is used in, let's say, higher education contexts.
Mm-hmm.
So I think also in writing, especially when you are at the proposal stage, where I think, you have to do this kind of educating sometimes. You're kind of trying to stand for yourself, if that makes sense. You're kind of telling them in writing, well, this will work because of one, two, three, four. There's
Mm-hmm.
literature that proves that it works, and what I'm exploring is going to be this particular thing, which will add one, two, three. But I think, as Adele said, or I think also at some point, to be honest, I reached a point where I was like seriously considering changing that committee member if it took them much longer to be on board. But luckily, things, got smoother after that. But I think, yeah, sometimes, especially with this new pedagogy, if you did some, if you invested some time in educating them, sometimes it works, but sometimes you just feel like, okay, maybe I just really need to have someone who, if doesn't 100% gets it, at least supports or understands or is willing to have me conduct this research, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Molen, did you have a similar experience, or maybe yours was different?
Virtual exchange is basically close to non-existent in Sweden. I mean, we are here at Malmö University, we are really in the forefront of developing virtual exchange. And I think we will start to give workshops on
Mm,
e-design and such things. There are a few other practical other institutions who are now starting to engage in VE practice, but it's very new. There's basically no research. So, but since I was very keen, together with my colleagues in the English department, to implement virtual exchange here as a long-term component of our program. So we want all pre-service teachers graduating from our program in all of our different programs to have experienced virtual exchange. So
mm,
my action research dissertation was part of doing that.
mm,
So yeah, similar experience. And my supervisors here in Sweden did not know anything about virtual exchange, but were very willing to learn. And then I was
mm,
fortunate that for 6 years, we had Shannon Sauro working here with us as a colleague. So
Mhm.
we sort of started developing virtual exchange
Shannon is great. She's
in a
great.
few, yeah, in a few courses. And then she moved back to the US, but we were able to have her come in as a supervisor for me. So I was very
mhm.
lucky to have her.
That's great.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
awesome. She was one of your
Mhm.
uh, committee members.
She was my supervisor. Yes.
That's awesome. That's
Mhm.
perfect.
Yeah.
Mhm,
I'm telling you, once I got Stephanie Dosher involved,
mm,
she put everybody in order and said, he absolutely is correct. And you guys don't know what you're talking about. My chair literally said to me, Adela, I learned so much. This was such an interesting topic. And I know I
mm,
gave you a hard time in the beginning, and he did,
mm,
did because he's thinking of virtual exchanges only for language learning, which it is great for language learning, but
Mm.
it's great for other things as well. So
mhm,
if you get somebody who's an expert, go for it. And you'd be surprised.
Yeah.
You
mhm,
email them, say, hey, I'm a PhD student. I'm doing this. I need an expert on my team.
Mm.
mhm.
They're very willing.
Yeah.
Most of them are very willing.
Yeah. I want to go back to the actual writing process and ask you both about receiving feedback from your committee members and your supervisor. I mean, obviously that could be not very easy for young scholars to get some criticism, or sometimes in some cases really, like, some supervisors ask you to maybe rewrite a section or like redo things or restructure things. So how, first of all, if you did structure that process of sending your supervisor, your committee, your work and receiving feedback, I think would be interested to learn how you did that in a way that works for you and your timeline. And also, what did you do with the feedback? Like, how did you work with the feedback? I mean, I'm sure maybe, you're not always convinced or happy or 100% sure that this is something you want to do or you want to follow the suggestions 100%. So I think the second part of the question was, how did you work with your supervisors and the committee's feedback? So let's maybe talk about, did you structure the drafting kind of feedback process itself? And if you did, how did you do that? Molen.
I'm sorry, Hiba, I'll go back to your questions. I just saw that
Mhm.
Nancy, you had your hand up there for a long time as well.
Oh, Because I think she said in the chat that she cannot speak.
Oh, I
So
see.
I
Yeah,
asked her,
sorry.
yeah, I asked,
Hello,
no,
everyone.
no,
Sorry. Yeah, because I was on the
oh,
bus,
great,
so I couldn't talk back then. But just
wonderful,
yeah,
okay, no
got
worries,
back
please
home.
go ahead.
So I just wanted to follow some of your sharing when you mentioned like persuasion is such a new area. So just in my case, it's my case as well. But like recently, I just knew that there's some other academics in my university practicing this one, but they are not in my department.
Great.
So it leads to my question here. So
Mm,
I'm in my final year now, in my third year, but in the UK, 3 years of PhD. Recently I've got some invitation to collaborate with some academics in virtual exchange. But at the same time, I'm well aware of the fact that because I got the funding for 3 years, so I want to get my PhD done. But at the same time, I want to, build up my CV. So my
mm,
question is not, I guess, not really about the writing process itself, but about how you prioritize things
mm,
when there are so many things on your plate. How do you get started with the writing
mm,
where you know that you should do that, but then there's some other things as well. It might help with your future
mm.
application. What? Yeah. So I just
No, that's a
was
very
wondering.
important question. That's a very important question. Adele, would you like to start with that?
Um, are you referring to prioritizing writing, or are you talking about should I read or should I write or
uh, priori- Prioritizing writing the thesis and other things like
Project.
still
Mm,
research, yeah, projects, still research related projects,
mm,
but like it's not your PhD.
mm.
oh, oh, oh. So you're involved with research in other projects? Is that what you're trying to say? Oh, that's a
Yeah, so I'm coming with
that's a
a
lot to
few,
do.
yeah,
Uh,
a lot, but like all the projects are so interesting, and I know that it contributes quite a lot to my CV. It helps with the job application, like
yeah,
after PhD. So
Mhm,
yeah. Um, I would just schedule days when you're working on the project, but I would work on my dissertation every day.
Mm,
Even if it's, and we were saying before you joined, even if it's only 10 minutes of writing, could do that. Do that
mm,
10 minutes of writing. Malin was talking about the pandemic, right? I was in the middle of that, and I had to switch a little bit of my focus to introduce the pandemic into my writing. So I had to do a lot of shifting around, looking for information and journals that talked about it. I kind of threw a monkey wrench into my whole thing. So I had to like kind of rethink things. So once you start having your ideas down on paper, you know, just go back and start rewriting. Like it helps. It helps in your thinking. It'll probably help you with your projects. I would continue do your projects during the day or whatever, but then find time in the evening, even when you come home, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever, to
mm,
work on that. I mean, you have
mm,
to have some free time, like on the weekends, to work on your
mm,
dissertation. So make it a point to do that. I mean, I was barely going out. I was home all the time working on this. So,
mm,
it's a grind,
mm.
but you have to get through it if you want to finish.
mm,
Yeah, I agree. And I was very, very scared to get sidetracked because I very easily get sidetracked. If there are opportunities or ideas, then I say, yeah, that sounds really interesting. But I had to learn very quickly in the process, for my sake, to say no and close doors to really interesting things, because I knew that otherwise there was a really serious risk for me of not finishing. So I had to stay focused and just get this done.
But I think both of you kind of emphasized something that I also heard from other people, and that is sometimes 15, 20 minutes of a day every day can actually make a difference.
Yes, yeah.
I think we underestimate time a lot, maybe. Like, I mean, yes, 15 minutes, 15 good minutes, 20 minutes a day, at least at the beginning, to actually get used to sitting down and dedicating this time to your dissertation does make a difference. And I think I've like in the personally in the recent months, I've been really trying to do this as hard as I can, because even if you're busy with family, with other things, if you can commit just to these 15 minutes a day, you can build on that maybe later on in the process. Before we finish, I really want to go back to this feedback question. So, Molin, did you structure your kind of like draft submission feedback with your supervisors?
What do you mean with structure?
So, for instance, some people, especially, when you start writing your dissertation, some people do not have very close mentorship from their supervisors. They basically structure everything on their own. So, did you, for instance, have like a completion plan where you agreed with your supervisors to submit a certain chapter by a certain deadline? They look at it, or like, did you finish the whole thing and then they looked at the whole draft and then you worked with their feedback? How did you structure that?
We had close feedback sessions the whole way through. So also, I think it maybe comes naturally to a compilation thesis, because I was working on one article at a time and working towards deadlines for submission and things like that. So I had to really work on one article manuscript, and we had several feedback sessions on each draft together. And then when I got feedback from my supervisors, of course, I had four of them, so quite often they gave me conflicting feedback. So we had some really interesting meetings together, and we talked about their feedback and their comments on my draft, where sometimes they would get into really interesting discussions and it would lead to something else. So I thought that was a rich experience as well. And sometimes I chose not to accept their feedback, and that was fine. I mean, they were sort of guiding me in the project, but in the end, it was my decision, what I choose to do.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
Adele, what about you?
We did this thing of chapter by chapter. They would make comments in the Word doc. You know how you get comments on certain things. Sometimes it's like as simple as, oh, you forgot a comma here or whatever. But sometimes it was more complicated. So we would have a meeting and discuss it. Sometimes it would be, even sometimes some feedback is just their concern. Do you mean this? Do you mean that? How do you, they just want a clarification from you. Or you have to know what you're saying. You have to be strong with what you have, a conviction of some sort. So sometimes, like Malin was saying before, that feedback wasn't useful to me or whatever, and I chose not to use it. In the end, it's your decision. At one point, I wrote something in the final chapter about how the students that were tested, certain students that were in coil with a South American country, behave differently than those that, in England or in another country. And Honestly, it's funny. I noticed that with the British, there was more cultural, how could I put it? They were not getting along with two of the professors that were
Mm,
doing the UK. They weren't getting along with the American kids. They just had different work ethics, different way of.
mm,
And I made a statement that perhaps American students, were used to Mexican students because we have a large immigration of Mexican
mm,
communities here, or Colombian. And so Stephanie didn't agree with that. She says, no, 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 it has nothing, and we talked about it. And I decided that to leave it alone because maybe it was opening a can of worms that was not
mm,
actually part of my dissertation. That I'm
mm,
introducing a new topic that
mm,
maybe wasn't appropriate. So I removed it because I realized she was right.
mm,
So you have to come to your own conclusions on
mm.
the feedback.
Yeah, because you know your data, better than anybody else. So
Right.
to you, when they share feedback, then you know which works and which doesn't really work.
Yes.
So I think
Absolutely.
this totally makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
Well, it's 8 p.m. my time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know that a lot of people have to go, but I think one big lesson from this session is keep writing, touch
Yeah.
your dissertation every day, even if it's just for a short period of time. Consistency is key. Discuss things with your supervisors. We can always make your own decisions after having discussions if you need to. But I guess also at some point you realize that you have to focus on a certain scope. If you really want to talk about lots of things, you will never finish. Same for reading. Like sometimes you just really have to stop and work with what you have on this project. So Adele and Mullen, thank you both so much for sharing your experience. And Nancy and Anna and everybody who's watching, thank you so much for being here. I think that was really great to talk, and I think you're both open to any questions. We can share your emails with people if you don't mind. Any final words before we finish? Maybe Adele?
A bad dissertation is one that's not done. So get it done.
Exactly. And I think you captured everything there, Eva, in saying that consistency is key. I think so too. Just stay with it. Um, yeah. Thank you so much for the invitation
Of
Yes,
course.
Hiba.
Thank you both.
It
Thank
was
you so
great.
much for being with us, and I really do hope to see you all in another webinar of the
Yes.
SIG. Thank you both. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you a
Thanks,
lot.
everybody.
It's been a
Bye.
pleasure. Thank you.